Hello again, listeners, and welcome to another episode of the MM360 Global Movement special series we call Chatting with Slava the Jordanian. I'm your host, Slava the Jordanian, or as some of you know me on Instagram and social media, STJ. I am here with my one and only JD Yusef as my co-host. And here in this series, we get to tell our stories in order to uncover and discover the secrets, the tools, the lessons of our immigration journey for one reason only, in order for us to master an unlimited mindset by eliminating limited beliefs and limited thoughts that will hinder you from achieving what you try to achieve as you get displaced from your home world by choice or by default, by design or by default, so to speak. How you doing, Yusef?
Doing well, Dr. Slava. Thank you so much for having me again.
So nice to see you. No, thank you for collaborating and partnering with me. I'm very, very excited about this episode. And we spoke a lot about this, didn't we?
Very, very in-depth. And, I'm really, really interested in getting into the meat and bones of this conversation. So
yeah. Absolutely. So just as a reminder, all these episodes are available on all podcast platforms to be available for you guys to listen to it whenever and wherever you are. Plus, they are going to be available on the YouTube, the MM360 Global Movement YouTube channel. So feel free to like and share. And thank you so much for listening and joining us. All right. So this episode, we decided to incorporate an article that we came across and we read, and it taps into exactly some of the topics that we touched on in the past 3 episodes, or at least the 2 episodes. And that is identity crisis, or identity confusion as an immigrant. Last episode, we talked about being a child of diaspora, or being the immigrant that got displaced by default or by design, or even as somebody who is displacing themselves from their small town, even village, within the same country, to go into a bigger city or a bigger town to pursue more opportunities and more resources to make your life better, and to give back to your community, whether you are seeking education, whether you're seeking different profession, whether you're seeking certain training, taking that training and applying yourself in your new world, or taking all these tools and all these skills, going back to your home world and serving, giving back to your community, giving back to your tribe, giving back to your village, town, or even your family. That happens a lot around the world as we speak. And the world becoming closer and closer interwoven together because of social media, because of the digital technology that helps us stay in touch with each other. And the world and the globe becoming a very, very small world. Everybody can talk to everybody all around the world. I'm here in New Hampshire, and Yusuf is in Alabama, and we met through LinkedIn, as we mentioned in other episodes. And here we are, we are doing a lot of fun projects together, and we are talking about things we never thought we are going to given the opportunity or the platform to talk about and tell our stories. So let's jump into the article and see where we end up, Yusuf, shall we?
Sounds great. Let's do it.
All right. So this article, I'm going to put my glasses on because after 40, you wear reading glasses. Yes, you do. Wait and see. You'll find out yourself. So this article is called Migration, Cultural Bereavement, and Cultural Identity. It is written by the National Library of Medicine, or published by the National Library of Medicine. And what caught my eye is it's a really, really good article. It's very easy to read, but the amazing thing is they touched upon everything that personally, I can speak to myself, and I hope you guys relate or identify with that. What I have been going through the past 36 years after I left my home world at age 19. I am 55. And I was reading the article, and to be honest with you, it brought tears to my eyes. I'm like, oh my God, finally somebody's putting it in words that really describes how I felt. Because I've been searching for the past maybe 2 years or even 3 years about something that I can read, I can identify with, and makes me feel like, yeah, I wasn't crazy. Validating my emotions, validating my thoughts, validating my experience, my challenges. So it was a breath of fresh air. What do you think about the article, Yusef?
I thought it was very, very insightful on many levels. But to your point, it did touch upon a lot of experiences, right? From the first generation to the immigrant to, someone who just came over here at a young age and, is trying to learn how to become an American, right? So, but very, very unique perspective. And by the way, I think this article speaks to not only our story, but other people's stories, other immigrant stories. I mean, we're not special, we are, but not in that respect,
yes, you
right?
are.
So,
You're very
right. So, but yes.
No, I agree with you 100%. Like I said before, whether you are a first generation American or you are first generation American immigrant, whether you even not in America, you're going from Germany to India, whether you're going from Italy to England, believe it or not, there's a huge difference between the culture of Italy and the culture of England. I mean, they are in a different, well, England is an island where Italy is in the continent of Europe. But I visited both countries all my life. And even myself, mentally, I have to put on a different hat when I am in that country in order to oblige the custom and the culture of that country. Because I visited them since I was a child, so it's part of me. It becomes very natural. But there is a difference. So migration, and by the way, they're saying that in 2026 to 2028, even the United States demographics is going to look so different than what it is right now, because more and more people are going to move within the states, that the population balance is going to change. So even moving through United States, going from Kentucky to California, like you, Yusuf, you were born in California, but you now live in Alabama. Those are two different almost country customs, with their values, their beliefs, the way of life. Don't you agree?
Absolutely. So, we can talk about an American culture, but then once you're in here, that American culture needs to be dissected because it varies from place to place. You're in New England. First time I experienced that culture, very different. I've never been around, an atmosphere like that. So, but yeah, very, very good point.
Yeah, so migration or adaptability or multicultural adaptability, I call it, or some of the experts, they call it multicultural competence. It doesn't have to be completely experienced out of your world. It could be within your world. And I believe that even changing circumstances or having been affected by major life events. Let's give you an example. If somebody gets married, they are somewhere in North Dakota, get married to their high school sweetheart, and that high school sweetheart becomes very career oriented, and he or she, they want to move out of North Dakota to New York City. That's huge, right? So you're taking someone who is born and raised in maybe a small community, has a certain traditional values and beliefs, to New York City. It's a big city that has a completely different values. And I went to school in New York City. I can say New York City, it's its own world. It's like its own globe compared to the rest of the country, because I lived in California I lived in New York, I lived in New Jersey, now New England. I visited Florida a lot. I'd never been in the Midwest, but I met a lot of, or the middle of the country, I met a lot of patients from there, whether they got displaced because of career, professional, school, or they married somebody from New England and they settled here. So they had to go through that identity transformation, so to speak, or identity rehabilitation. And in order for them to fit into the new community they embarked upon. But again, I said it in the last episode, you have some people that they relocate or get displaced by design, but they don't want to conform to that culture. And they create their own world within their world. They don't want to change. And you have the other group that completely strip everything off. I don't want to be in North Dakota. I'm completely a New Yorker. They become a New Yorker. They talk like a New Yorker. They act like a New Yorker. They walk like a New Yorker. And their values have changed because sometimes when you displace yourself by design, so displacing by default, that's a whole different world. Displacing by design, you make the decision to displace yourself. Then you got to ask yourself, do I want to adapt and conform to that new tradition? Or do I want to keep some of this and some of that? I want to be both. So giving that, let's tap into the article. So this is a page that is titled The Cultural Identity. And it says here, it is important to define basic sociologic terms of identity to understand cultural identity. And my understanding to that, there are sociological terminologies that we need to understand, acknowledge in order for us to really discover the process of changing your cultural identity if you wish to do so by design or by default. So it says here, culture is learned and passed through generations and includes the beliefs and value systems of a society. And we tapped into that a little bit last episode about the traditional gender role expectations. So the traditional gender role expectations, the way we discussed it or defined it last time, is whatever the society needs from the individuals, then they set up the traditional gender role expectations. Let's say you have a society, just like make believe, you have a society that they need women as warriors more than men. So then that society puts the standard on women to be trained, martial trained, to be nourished, to be conditioned to fight and to protect that society. If another society is saying that we want all the men to be farmers, right, and they're just farm and produce because that's what the society needs, then the majority of the male in that society expectation is to be farmers. So they get trained as farmers from very young age, the value of farming, the belief that this is the best thing for them. And that becomes part of their blueprint, that that's what the society expects from us. Now, take that, if you shift your society, right, now you tap into a different culture. We need, as an immigrant, that's my advice, before you even consider going into a new culture, again, displace yourself by design or by default, check into what kind of culture expectations are going to be, right? Whether if you are going in as a professor, as a teacher, what are the expectations from teachers? Does that culture need more teachers? Give you a biggest example, time for a story. My parents, my dad is Palestinian, my mom is Jordanian. They grew up in the same exact town, Asalt. Asalt is a very rural, mountainous terrain town, looks like Sicily, literally. And the highest point in Asalt in Jordan, if you go to the highest point at night, is absolutely gorgeous. You actually can see the West Bank lights, right? So there is a lot of interchangeable cultural beliefs and standards and values between the Palestinian coming from the West Bank into Jordan and from Jordan into the West Bank, because they're neighboring each other. Okay, so when my parents met, they went to the same school. Then my mom ended up in Lebanon for a university. My dad ended up in Egypt for university. Then they went back into Jordan as college graduate, and that's when they met. Now, when my dad had to be displaced by default because it was a turmoil in Jordan about socialism, Marxism, and communism, and had to tone it down a little bit, and he had the opportunity to displace himself, he got rejected, displace himself to Saudi Arabia. Why? Because Saudi Arabia needed teachers. My mom was a teacher. So my dad, in his head, he said, I don't want to go to Saudi Arabia. They're too conservative. There's nothing to do. I am a Jordanian. I grew up in Egypt. He was in Egypt boarding schools from 8th grade all the way through university. So he already has embraced the Egyptian culture, the writing, the libertarian kind of mindset, the entertainment, the theater world. He loved it, right? So he said, okay, I'm going Saudi. He felt like he's going backwards, but Saudi needed teachers. So they got 5-year contract to go to Saudi to calm things down, hoping to go back to Jordan. Fast forward 20 years later, they never went back to Jordan. But what I'm trying to say is Saudi Arabia needed female teachers to build their education, women education system. So they recruited a lot of teachers under one condition. Those teachers had to abide by certain traditional gender role expectations for a female teacher. Now, think about it. My mom was a tomboy, really. She was one of 6 girls. She's number 2. And she was the apple of her father's eye. Very proud of her. Full scholarship from the government into the AUB, and she was pre-med. She was going to go to medical school, and I wrote about the story on my Instagram. She comes back from Jordan by default because her mom passed away at age 37 with kidney failure. She had to go back, and she was hoping to complete medical school. She was going to have a free ride medical school in Canada by the Jordanian government scholarship. The unfortunate circumstances, of course, change her mental status. You know, my dad is a widow. I'm child number 2, child number 1. The first girl is married and she has her own life and children and stuff. And my youngest sister, number 6, my aunt, Khitam, she was 4 years old. So my mom went from Beirut, the Paris of the Middle East. Can you imagine going to school in the 60s, in university in Beirut in the 60s, and going back to a SALT, very conservative, very traditional, very tribal influenced community and society? Not only that, by default, because her mom passed away and she felt that the traditional gender role expectation from her. Now she's the matriarch of the family because her eldest sister is married, her mom is gone. She had a responsibility to forget about her dreams and to help and serve the family. So now, can you imagine what my mom was going through? She went from being a doctor, all right, I'm going to teach for a little bit, see what things are going, and maybe I can revive my scholarship later to go to medical school. I just want to make sure my dad and my sisters are fine. Of course, that did not happen because through that process, she met my father. So from going from Jordan to Lebanon, from Lebanon back to Jordan, from Jordan to Saudi, I cannot even imagine the cultural competency that she had to adapt to or adopt in order for her to survive Saudi Arabia. Now, add to that, when her sister graduated from University of Cairo, visited Saudi Arabia, she landed a prince of Saudi Arabia. And my dad used to tell me, I'm never going back to Jordan because now your aunt decided to marry a prince, and now she is rooted in Saudi Arabia. Of course, your mom wants to be close to her sister because of her past experience of leaving her family behind, and then her mom passed away, feeling responsible going back. Now I'm not leaving Saudi, which it really weighted on him. And sure enough, 19 years later, we never left Saudi, and he never went back to Jordan. He actually ended up in Colorado. Oh, can you imagine what they're, now that this is without social media, this is without cell phones, this is without internet. How did they master a mindset? I'm not sure if it was limited or unlimited mindset in order to survive it. And when you ask us like, what's wrong with my parents? That's what's wrong with your parents. They've been through a lot of adaptability. They sacrifice a lot for us, for a better life, and also for them. That's a lot of skipping around. That's a lot of jumping around. So that's my story, Yusef. What do you think?
That's quite remarkable. You're a very good storyteller, A, and B, I think this exemplifies kind of the atypical story of our people, right? It has been filled with turbulence and heartache, but we still managed to figure out a way to overcome. Like your dad ended up in Colorado, of all places, right?
Yeah.
Totally random, based upon his.
Very random. You know what? The funny thing is, I remember when we asked him. So, mind you, this is a timeline. I'm always about timeline, context. So, timeline. I got engaged in 1991. Last time I was in Saudi Arabia was the Gulf War. After the Gulf War, and I remember sitting with my dad in his study. I'm like, Dad, what do you want to do? He goes, I have no idea. I'm like, come on, Dad, you always have a plan. Of course you do. That's what I get it from. It's strategic planning comes from my dad. And he goes, I don't know. And I said, listen, I'm getting married next year. Got married August 1992. And you guys need to really consider relocation, another displacement. He looked at me. He goes, I'm going back to Jordan. I'm like, how about my mom? He goes, I don't know. She got me stuck here for 20 years, supposed to be 5, and I don't really care. I might be going back to Jordan. So I said, okay, so left it at that, left Saudi, never went back. That was the last time I was in the Middle East, 1991, by the way, and I'm going back to Egypt for vacation in 2 weeks, and it's crazy going back to the Middle East. But anyways, so I left, got married. Then I find out that my parents are moving to Colorado. So this was one of the few phone calls that I initiated with my dad. So I picked up the phone, called Dad. I only call Dad when it's really serious. I'm like, Dad, Colorado? Really? He goes, well, you live in Maine. Or you're going to be living in Maine because after graduation, my husband ended up in a job there. And I want to go to Colorado. I said, why Colorado? He goes, well, he did his research and he wanted a state that has no humidity like Saudi Arabia, no heat like Saudi Arabia, and no water. He was a great swimmer. My mom is not a great swimmer. My mom's terrified of water. And he wants mountains. He wants mountains so he can hike and walk. And believe it or not, he had his own garden, like somebody I know. And he loved it there. He loved the dry air. He loved the view. He loved the comfortable winters. He didn't mind snow as long as it's manageable and you can just get up after snowfall. Colorado is beautiful like that. And he didn't have to deal with water or too much or humidity, basically. And he was buried. He got buried there, too. That was his wish. He got buried in a beautiful, beautiful spot in the mountains. And I'll share that picture one day, hopefully, with you guys. So, but that's my dad mindset process when he decided or had to decide on a place that he knew that's going to be his last stomping ground. He had to find a place that simulates a salt, right? A salt, it was very terrain, very mountainous, very dry, rocky village. I don't know how they built their houses. It literally looks like Sicily. So there's a lot of similarity between a salt geographically, weather-wise, salt is very dry, barely any snow, no water, and Colorado. So in his mind, he was looking for a place that will nostalgically give him that comfort feel that looks like home, knowing that if anything happens to him, he wants to get buried here. But why not in Jordan? Why not in Jordan? Because we bury within 24 hours, and there's no time for us to ship him. And unfortunately, he died within 3 weeks after diagnosis with GI cancer. But so we had to bury. So we find a cemetery, non-denominational cemetery, and we picked a beautiful spot under a tree facing the mountains, and that's exactly where he wanted to be. But the fascinating mental process behind him deciding of all the places in the world that he traveled to, that he wanted to be, was Colorado. So if that doesn't give you a hint of how an immigrant mind works, no matter where you are, no matter how many places you got displaced to, you always nostalgic to what home looks like and what home feels like. It's fascinating. It's part of your blueprint. I don't think you can do anything to get rid of that ever. So do you have a story? Go ahead, Yusef.
I was just going to say, I think going back to one of our main themes in previous podcasts was knowing where you come from is very powerful and kind of gives you direction. So it seems like, with many immigrants, refugees, that they're always trying to find a home away from home, right? And so that's very, very powerful because that's your comfort zone, right? That's where you want to retreat because you're in a foreign environment and everything is new and scary, and you have to keep your guard up, right? So very, very unique, very interesting story. Thank you for sharing.
Yeah, of course. Now, tapping into the concept of mastering an unlimited mindset by eliminating limited beliefs. If my dad had any limiting ideation, he would have never, ever achieved as much as he would have achieved. Now, my dad was a libertarian. My dad was a feminist. My dad was all about civility, justice, equality. And he wrote about that in his books. But for somebody that is, of course, to write that much and to write passionately about these ideas, you have to have an unlimited mindset. With all the challenges that he had, like I said, he tried to conform to the Saudi lifestyle. He tried to become a Saudi. That did not work out. He tried to convince us to go back to Jordan. That did not work out. He tried to convince my mom, to convince her sister not to marry a Saudi prince in order for us to go back to Jordan. That did not work out. So those are also mental rejections. Those are not physical rejections, not literally somebody shoving him on the side of the road saying, you don't belong here, get out. Those are circumstantial rejections. Those are socioeconomical rejections that obligated him to displace himself by design and partially by default in order to give his family a better life. Now, if my dad had a limited mindset, we would have stayed in Jordan for sure. It's like, I don't care. That's my country. Take it or leave it. You got to accept me the way I am. It doesn't really matter. But he did not have a limited mindset. And he kept his mind open of all the possibilities, all the resources, and all the opportunities that the universe will ever give him. Of course, and we have a saying, like I mentioned in the last episode, الغربة صعبة والثمن غالي. Displacement, migration, moving, stepping out of your comfort zone is difficult. It's very, very challenging. I don't like the word difficult because difficult, it's almost like a dead end. It is challenging because when you say challenge, it means there's a resolution, there's a solution to it. But also with what price? So when you displace yourself by design, you have to weigh your options, right? Am I sacrificing this much for gain, loss and gain, right? Like you said, the punishment has to match the crime, right? So the gain has to match the loss in order for you to justify that sacrifice that you're going to make. So it is fascinating, and I constantly think about it all the time. What must have my dad been thinking when he made that decision? And he didn't have one child or two children, he had five. So it's not like, okay, I have plan A, plan B for two kids. I had to have plan A, plan B, plan C for five kids. So we're talking about 15 different plans, financially, economically, education, professionally, all that stuff. So I can't even imagine him sleeping a night. Now, after the fact, now I'm 55, I'm realizing that I didn't give him much credit when he was alive because I thought he was always an obstructor, disruptor, too much of a disruptor. And I felt like he did not do it with moderation. But I guess he did, now reflecting back on the facts and spending a lot of time thinking of him as an adult trying to make ends meet. And I really admire that about him. So those are the stories that we share in order for us to paying homage to our ancestors, our parents. Yusef, do you have a story about your grandparents? First of all, are your grandparents still around, or they have passed? Allah yarhamhum.
They have all passed, so
All of them,
thank you.
on both ends?
Correct.
Allah yarhamhum.
Yeah, Threes, thank you so much. But with looking at my grandparents' story and my parents' story, sacrifice is certainly a part of their DNA, right? As is all immigrants and refugees. But very, very interesting because my grandmother, although she was here, she never learned English. And, I think people find that fascinating. How is that possible? Been here for so long. Well, again, I think it's staying and finding her community and just trying to coalesce and learn and coming to a new land and coming with 7 kids, right? And so this constant worrying. And
so she had 7 kids her own?
Correct.
And they came all together? Nobody was born here?
Nobody was born here.
So they came with a family of 9?
Correct.
Okay, and they came to California?
They came to Michigan first, and then from Michigan to Alabama. Correct.
Okay, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. I just
no, absolutely. And actually, to that point, not knowing the language, the culture, anything about the United States, the family actually got separated in JFK because
what year was that, Yusef?
It was the bicentennial year, 1976, and my mother remembers seeing the 200 everywhere, right? Coming to America. So very, very interesting.
Yeah.
But again, going back to trying to feel comfort and learn, and some people just want to try to build their home away from home. Every time my mother or her siblings would go anywhere, she would pick up this cultural, religious directory that has every person around Palestine mapped out in the United States. And basically, they'd call these communities and basically say, hey, I have somebody coming over. Will you take care of them? They may not know them, but you're still from the community, right? Just, again, tells you about that mindset. So very, very unique.
Yeah, and keep in mind, that's just for our listeners or our millennials or Gen Zs, 1976, there is no internet, no social media, no cell phones. So people corresponded by post. And people communicated or interacted by what Yusef said is some kind of a flyer. So you go to a religious center or a cultural center or a center that you're just gathering for people to reminisce about their home world and exchange ideas, where you're from. And believe it or not, they might find relatives too. Again, the world is very, very small that way. And that's 1976. So that was in Michigan?
Correct.
Wow. Okay. And then so can you imagine trying to reach out to communities in order to identify with your home world across the country in 1976?
It's unfathomable, honestly.
I don't know how people did it. Like I was born in 1969, and now I'm used to having technology. I'm not very tech savvy. Ask my husband.
Oh,
and ask Yusuf even, but Yusuf is much gentler about his expression and perception of me with the technology. Um, but can you imagine corresponding can you imagine if you write a letter, if you're in Michigan, and within like the Orthodox Church, and going to a luncheon and meeting somebody, and they said, hey, there's a convention happening in LA. How do you even correspond to that? How do you even reconnect and say, like, I want to go because I want to see other people that just like me, you know? It probably took a lot of planning. It took a lot of hard work, and they needed to put their guards up because you don't know who to trust and what to trust too. Back in the day, especially like right now, as a displaced or as an immigrant, whether displaced refugees. So she came. Your grandmother came with 7 children. How old were they? Do you know? Like, what's the age range? That's crazy.
Yeah, so youngest was 5, and the oldest was like, I think 20, 21, something like that.
Wow.
Yeah. So again, you know, it's funny listening to their experiences, and now, you know, a lot of them have already assimilated. You know, the older ones, you know, are more cultured, if you will, right? But going back to that dichotomy of assimilation, and also a term called synchronization is a term we used in religious history, right? So basically the process of either taking on a brand new culture, you know, assimilating, you know, or the process of taking bits and pieces, synchronization of certain cultures. So really, really unique.
Yeah, that's very interesting. That I never heard that term before, but it makes a lot of sense. So the culture here, according to this article, is learned and passed through generations and includes the beliefs and value system of a society. We just did that. We just shared stories and we just shared experience in order for us to communicate and exchange the ideas and exchange the lessons, whether we went through or our ancestors went through, in order for us to make this world a better place. One of the things that we're trying to do to make this world a better place by education and by knowledge, okay? We have to decipher between facts and fiction, between sense and nonsense, in order for us to be empowered to fulfill our dreams. Because again, we sacrifice a lot. We leave everything we know and everyone we love behind to pursue a better life, whether, again, displacement by design or displacement by default. If you are displaced by default, like I said, whether it's environmental issues, major life changes, events, political, financial, socioeconomic, agricultural, professional, educational, whatever the reason is, or displacement by design, meaning that you're the type of person that you don't feel satisfied, you don't feel content, you don't feel that you have been empowered where you are right now, whether it's a small town or a big city. Some people even displace themselves from big city to a smaller rural communities, like my in-laws did. So my in-laws came in, my husband was born in Egypt, and my father-in-law grew up on the west bank of the Nile, area called Mahalla or Mansoura. The west bank of the Nile, during the Ottoman Empire, was very, very rich with cotton and wheat production, to the point that the cotton stock was very, very strong. And the Egyptian pound was stronger than the British pound at that time because of the stock value of the cotton production in Egypt. So his family owned a lot of land, but my husband's mom, she came from Cairo, from the tribal community of the outskirts of Cairo. So my husband was born in Giza, Cairo. When they came here, they came on Thanksgiving Day, believe it or not, 1970. And the irony is, I am landing in Egypt for the first time in 2024 Thanksgiving Day, which is
Wow.
fascinating, right? The irony. So when they came here in 1970, my father-in-law did not want to leave. My mother-in-law wanted to leave because, again, there was so much political turmoil, and that he wanted a better life for Ehab. He wanted better education. He wanted easier life for him, and he wanted somewhere that he can actually flourish with part of the family that are already here. So he applied to the United States, not to Canada, because he had cousins he had family members in Vegas, Nevada, and he had family members in California, and also he had family members in New Jersey. So he got approved to go to Nevada. But when the American embassy looked at the relative that's sponsoring him, their income, it wasn't enough to provide for both families. So they defaulted into the second option, which come New Jersey. He ended up in New Jersey. But my father-in-law used to tell me that I wish I did not leave the way I left. And he loved the United States. In his mind, United States was the best country in the world, the best world ever, the most embracing, inclusive culture when he came in the 70s. Of course, it changed over time, but he didn't want to leave. If it wasn't for my mother-in-law, and put it this way, if my father-in-law married a different person, he would have probably still there in Egypt. Now, the interesting thing, when he retired, he insisted, dug his heels, he wanted to go back to Egypt. And I lived with him during dental school when I went to NYU Dental. And when I heard, just like when I heard my dad want to go to Colorado, I heard my father-in-law going back to Egypt. I'm like, what are you doing? You're going to hate it. He goes, no, it's my country. See, when we get older, we revert back to all these ideation, cultural values, traditional beliefs. We want that tribal connection back. So he took all his retirement money, bought a condo in Alexandria on the water, absolutely gorgeous, fully furnished. 2 years he lasted. We were living in Maine, and we thought he's like, I want to come back. Sure, you can come and visit. He came in and dropped his bag. He goes, I'm not going back. I'm like, what just happened? He goes, he sold everything. He sold the condo, he sold the furniture. He came back with his luggage, almost like the 1970 episode, right? Because I don't think he felt like he belonged there after the fact, that he was so, like you said, so culturalized by the United States culture and custom after many, many decades being here in the United States. Some of his friends went back and they simulated, right? They went back, they had his families, their kids going back and forth visiting. They just retired there. My father-in-law couldn't do it. But that's a personality thing. That's not a cultural thing. He tried for 2 years to engulf himself back into the culture, back into the customs. He hated the way they did things. He said, nothing is easy. I couldn't get a driver's license. Everybody was busy with their lives. The roads are really hard to drive. It was just hard to get even a phone installed into, because you have to go through so many channels, because the system is different than here. Here is so easy, straightforward. Over there, you have to go through different channels. It's not as simple and straightforward as the United States, but he had to find out for himself, because in his mind, when he decided to go back, he thought, okay, I'm going back. I'm very nostalgic about home. He thought he was going to go back to the original life that he had, because that's all the memory he had, right? And he didn't even visit, he visited Egypt every couple of years, but he was there as a visitor, not as somebody that's living every single day trying to get things done at home on daily basis. So that was very fascinating. It's almost like the opposite. My dad did not want to go back to Jordan. He ended up Colorado. My father-in-law insisted to go back to Egypt because he was so nostalgic and melancholy about going back, and he missed it so much. He's like, well, I have one child. He's married. He's all settled. Why am I sitting here for, there's no reason for me to stay. I want to go back to give back to my community and be spending the rest of my life with my family, making up for all the time that I have missed because I had to sacrifice my residency in Egypt in order to give my child, my only child, a better life. That is fascinating indeed. And like I said, I can't even imagine the identity crisis that he had to go through back and forth, and that taps into the cultural adaptability, multiple cultural adaptability, multicultural competency too. For him to be able to just switch back and forth. He went for 2 years, he didn't like it, he came to the United States as if nothing happened. But that's what you gain as an immigrant, regardless of the mindset. You gain the ability to adjust and adapt. It's like, okay, this doesn't work. I got to go back there because I have experienced that before. And I have the tools and I have the lessons in order to go back to that life. My dad did, and he flourished in Colorado. He lived in Jordan. He lived in Egypt, Jordan, Saudi, and then the United States. He was displaced 4 times, right? And that gained for him that cultural adaptability and multicultural competency too. Does that resonate with you?
Yeah, that's very, very powerful, actually. And, the whole idea of, leaving your homeland or your home and then trying to return to it, or this sense of nostalgia is very, very powerful. But also, again, it comes back to those clashing of two worlds and our development of our personality and our character, right, over time based upon our experiences. So.
Yes, absolutely, 100%. So the rest of the paragraph says culture has been described as features that are shared and bind people together into a community. And we did discuss that, right? Telling our stories brings us together. Sharing our experiences brings us together. Talking about our journey challenges brings us together. So what we're trying to create this culture of migrants and migration experience in order to help whoever is considering whether you're moving from your comfort zone within the same country, displacing by design, or you are coming from a whole different world, your new world, into your home world, into the new world, being displaced by design or being displaced by default. So whether internal or international, domestic or international, the displacement can have 2 types, in my opinion. Do you agree, Yusef?
Absolutely. And not to get too philosophical, but I think there could be a physical and a mental displacement, right? Again, there's something that needs to be said about people who come to this country and then who don't want to adapt at all, right? Because they have this sense of belonging back home and they're familiar, and everything that's unknown is scary and dangerous. So, but very, very powerful.
But don't you think that sometimes those emotions, the feeling of fear, the feeling of not feeling, the feeling of insecurity, have you seen through whether your family, friends, or through your community, or even just your family, have you seen any pattern that they took all these emotions and fueled their drive to make something better of themselves?
Yeah, and that's the majority story of our people, refugees, immigrants, right? Again, I learned this from you, this rejection is redirection, right? So again, closed door isn't a closed door to us. It's just a fact, right? And if you talk to another person who doesn't come from this immigrant or refugee background, closed door is a closed door. They don't try to press on, or turn the knob. It's almost like it was written for them, right? Well, it's not our story. We just keep going, and it is what it is. And I guess final failure and ultimate failure is death. You can't come back from that. So anything else you can come back from.
Yeah, but I think it really depends who is defining the ultimate failure. Because from my generation, back in my day, living in Saudi Arabia, failing is not an option, because that is part of the traditional role expectation, not gender expectation, just a role expectation as immigrant. Because, they look at you as, hey, you sacrificed everything. The price was really high. And you tell me you failed, so this was all for nothing. So that mindset puts a lot of pressure on our well-being too, that we have to perform. Not only we have to perform, we have to overperform everybody else, to overcompensate. Because remember, we're coming in this new world. There's stereotype, there's a stigma, the challenge of stigma. We have to champion the stigma, right? So as we understand, and we hear it when we are in our home world, don't go there, they're going to judge you. Don't go there, they don't like people like us, right? And that puts a lot of beliefs and value in our mindset. And then you start either creating a limited mindset, or you say, you know what, I'm not going to believe it. I want to go experience for myself. I want to generate a proof for myself that this is not going to work, with the thought of failure is not an option. Failure is not an option because I sacrificed everything. This has to get done. So there is, as migrant, as a foreigner to the new world, as an outsider, right? There is a clash between, okay, my fear and my motion of insecurity because I'm not safe, because I'm not home. Is that going to feed my drive to help me accomplish what I need to accomplish, or is it going to be a hindrance to my accomplishments? And really depends on your personality style. And a lot of people that I left behind at home, like my own cousins, right? They are royalty, they're very privileged, they have all the resources in the world that they need, but they never left home, right? They are in the same even district in Jeddah, Saudi Arabia. They haven't even spread their wings outside the district where they grew up. Where here I am, and those are Saudis, not only privileged Saudis, royalty Saudis, but they're so scared and they're so attached to their culture and their community. Of course, there is social obligations too, but even by marriage, it's not like they're living in Riyadh. They're still in Jeddah. So that's a different mindset behind, I'm very comfortable, why should I change it? And you have a disruptor, they're saying like, no, I want to change because I want a better life. And that taps into the mastering an unlimited mindset by eliminating limited beliefs. Any final thoughts for our listeners? Because we're reaching to, I can't believe it's been an hour. Any final thoughts, Yusef?
No, I think this is very enlightening and sheds light on multiple topics within this cultural identity subtopic, right? So, but again, this is ever evolving, and it's part of our story. So I love it. So thank you.
Yeah, you're more than welcome. Now, speaking of identity, according to this article, identity is the totality of one's perception of self, or how we as individuals view ourselves as unique from others, right? So that's it. So the culture is basically the expectation of society towards us. Whether you're a newcomer or you are native, you're trying to move within your community. But the identity is your perception of yourself and how people are going to look at you. And that taps in what Yusef have just said. You have some people that have total simulation, and you have people that they go the other way because they don't feel, that's a perception of themselves. My father-in-law conducted a very traditional household in New Jersey, right? And most of his Arab friends or Egyptian friends, Palestinian friends, Lebanese friends have had the same idea, that generation. Now, when I met my generation, Gen X, they're a little bit different. They wanted the hybrid. They wanted to maintain that cultural identity, but with a little modern twist to it. The way they raise their kids, the way they feed their kids, the way they decorate their homes, the way they put pressure on the kids to learn Arabic and to go to the mosque or the church, or, or not even worshiping at all. that was a huge thing with my generation. We were basically the fork in the road to say, do I want to stick to the traditional cultures, or I want a different life than my parents? But that's the difference between culture and identity, and I'm sure we're going to tap into it later, because it's all very tightly interwoven with what we are all about as people. So I just want to thank all the listeners for hanging out with us, chatting with Slava the Jordanian. And as a reminder, please like and share. And these episodes are on all the podcast platforms for you guys to listen to it wherever you are, whenever you are. And also it is available on the MM360 Global Movement YouTube channel. So please, as a reminder, thank you so much, JD Yusef. I really, really love talking to you. I'm looking forward for our next week, episode 2. But also, I would like to remind you, for the sake of humanity, please continue sharing your stories and telling your stories, because that's how we learn, and that's how we maintain our cultural meaning too, as a tribe on this platform. So thank you so much for listening, and we hope to see you next time. Bye.
Bye for now.